Sun is coming in and out, so I might have to turn on some lights at some point. So, I was born in Sudan, and when I was very young, my family moved to Saudi Arabia, so I spent about 8 years of my life there, the first 8 years of my life. And when I was 8 and a half, my family came to the US, and we settled in the East Coast, and I've pretty much grown up there. Went to school here, went to college, also on the East Coast, and eventually lived on the West Coast for a while, lived in the southern part of the US for about a year, and now I'm back on the East Coast, different city from the city in which I grew up. And Arabic was my first language. I didn't know even the alphabet when I came to the US, the English alphabet, so I had to learn that. Anyway, I've told this story so many times, and so many people have asked me to explain to them how I arrived at this place, given my background. So my family is Muslim, and for all intents and purposes, I grew up in a devout Muslim family. I was myself, I would say, devout, especially compared to my siblings. I cared. I think part of me caring, without me having realized it at the time, was a combination of psychological childhood injuries that resulted in me feeling like this was a way or the way to get love out of my parents, specifically my mother. Now, I think that's true. I came to the US right before September 11. 5th grade is when 9/11 happened, which was a year after I came to the US. So I started 4th grade and I was fine. And then 5th grade, I remember I started wearing the hijab right before school started. And school started in September, and it was like a few days before 9/11. And then 9/11 happens, and I remember getting bullied by a few kids in my class. Obviously, I was a foreigner. They knew that I was in ESOL classes, and they knew that I was wearing a hijab. They knew that I was Muslim. All of a sudden, I became like the terrorist-looking kid to target. And eventually, it got bad enough that my mother herself told me that I should take it off. And I actually didn't want to take it off for reasons I'm not going to get into now, but I ended up taking it off, and it did improve things a bit because I wasn't obviously Muslim to everyone else who didn't already know me. The kids in my class didn't really stop bothering me too much about it, and I remember there was a girl who asked me, "Are you with them or are you with us?" And I was like, "Well, who's them?" She says, "Well, Muslims." And I was like, "Well, of course I'm with them because I'm Muslim. I'm not Christian like you are." She was like, "Oh no, so you're with the terrorists." There's a lot that happened that I didn't know how to respond to, that I didn't understand. So I was very hungry to know more about my own religious tradition at that point. But I was too young to do anything about it. And fast forward to high school, at that point, things have calmed down a bit, so I made friends. Most of my friends were not Muslim, actually. But I remember I would watch a lot of Dr. Zakir Naik, if you know him, in like the Muslim apologist scene. I remember buying a Bible from the Dollar Tree. I would find all the contradictions that Dr. Zakir Naik pointed to, and I would challenge all the Christians, the hardcore Christians. I don't think I challenged any of my Christian friends, but I did challenge. There were these Christian kids who were clearly very serious about their faith, and they were the ones that I challenged. Just because they were serious about their faith doesn't mean that they lived it out in the best way. I mean, they were kids, right? It's like I clearly, I don't know, arguably didn't live out my faith in the best way either. But I think I felt especially indignant toward them, and like I really had to challenge them because oftentimes they would be the ones who would approach me first in condescending tones, or sometimes they'd even say like, "Hey, you're going to hell," which is the best way to approach someone. I get it though. Like I enjoyed it, right? Because I also felt like I had the upper hand, and I totally did, because they knew almost nothing about my faith tradition. They knew nothing about my book. They couldn't understand it. There were almost no resources at the time for people, and I had everything. I had all these resources telling me like, this is what the Bible says, and this is how it contradicts this other part of the Bible. So I'd bring it to them, and they would always be at a loss and didn't know how to respond. And I just always felt like I won. I went to college. I ended up joining the Muslim Student Association. I was on the board for several years. I ended up actually majoring in like Middle Eastern studies because I took a class in the department on a whim, and I loved it so much that I ended up majoring in it, to the utter disappointment of my parents. But I felt like I had to, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was getting answers to the questions that I wished that I had answers to back when I was being interrogated by kids in the 5th grade about Islam and my religion and what I believed in. And I was introduced to philosophers from the golden age of Islam. I remember reading Al-Ghazali, and Ibn Rushd, or Averroes as he's known in the West, and having my mind being blown by the arguments that they were making, the things that they were saying, which to me at the time seemed so antithetical to the Islam that I had been brought up in. I think partly because my mother specifically picked up her Islam from Sudan, but especially from Saudi Arabia. She kind of took it to an extreme that was very unhealthy. And I really don't say that lightly, because I do think even now, even though I'm no longer Muslim, I've seen healthy expressions of Islam. We can, argue about that, but she definitely took it to an extreme. But then there are certain things that she didn't necessarily take to an extreme. There are certain things that were just by design extreme in Islam. For instance, the issue of apostasy, right? It's really hard to argue against death penalty for apostasy from a Muslim perspective. And I say that as someone whose first job, one of my first real jobs out of college, was working on religious freedom issues within Islam and trying to make arguments for religious freedom from within the Muslim faith itself rather than from secular perspectives. And I remember reading Averroes or Ibn Rushd saying something along the lines of reason and faith should not ever contradict, right? If they do contradict, it means we're either misunderstanding the faith or our logic or our reasoning is flawed in some way. And I found that to be fascinating. And so what do? And he said that you go with reason, which is interesting and very debatable. You can get into it, we're not going to get into it now, what that means and whether that's necessarily the best thing to do. But I loved it at the time because I remember really rebelling against the things that my mother would try to dictate that I felt were really unreasonable. And sometimes I even felt that they were not really grounded in the tradition itself. Even if her interpretation was just one of many, she would act as if it's the only possible way, right? And so when she told you to do something, she told you, oh, God wants this from you. Oftentimes you would question whether that's actually true, but you couldn't, because if you questioned her, you questioned God, which was really problematic. But I remember being really excited about this when I learned about this quote from Ibn Rushd and taking it home and confronting my mother with it and saying to her, well, you know what Ibn Rushd says? There's a seeming contradiction between faith and reason. And she says, no, you listen to the Quran. And I said, no, he says to listen to reason because it means you misunderstood what the Quran is saying, most likely. And she really didn't like that. But she also didn't know enough to challenge me. So she said, I don't know about that. You should listen to the Quran, which is actually not a bad argument. My argument was not that great, but it's just the fact that I was able to have respectable theologians and philosophers from within the tradition make these arguments to back up what I'm saying, to challenge her. For once, I felt like she couldn't just dismiss them. And that was very empowering. And also I loved it because everything just seemed to make sense. Islam seemed to make sense all of a sudden. And not only did it make sense, it was also a place where you could freely question. And before that wasn't the sense that I'd gotten. And so I fell in love with the religion as if I had converted to it for the first time. And then my relationship with my mother deteriorated, and I think it also sort of affected my faith a bit. I think part of me was sort of rebelling against her, and I knew the best way to do that, because I couldn't really do anything, was to rebel against the things that she wanted me to do. For instance, I continued wearing the hijab, and I really, at a point, I remember I was questioning whether I should or shouldn't for legitimate reasons while still believing in Islam. But I think I ended up taking it off at one point because I think it was a combination. I didn't want it, and I knew it would bother her because I knew that she wanted this control. Yeah, I took it off. I didn't care. The 5 daily prayers, we need to talk about that for a second. They were a bit of a burden. They were very difficult to do all the time. Though, to be completely honest, I actually was pretty diligent about completing them as a kid. From, the age of 7 or so, when I essentially started learning to pray. For the most part, I prayed consistently up until the age of 15, I would say, because I started dating a guy for the first time, which my parents obviously didn't know, and if they knew or know now, I don't know what they would do. But I remember feeling like I'd done something so wrong that, because my mother used to say this to me, even when I was wearing the hijab when I was young, if I did anything that she didn't like, she would say, well, what's the point of you even wearing the hijab? Might as well take it off because you're going to hell anyway. And so you had to just be perfect, or might as well not even try. And so I remember feeling like, oh, I was doing this horrible thing, so it didn't even matter if I prayed. It's like, what's even the point of praying So I pretty much stopped, and I would do it whenever I felt like anyone was observing or could see that I'm not doing it. I would do it. But even when I wanted to, at points I would say, okay, try to actually do them. I just couldn't anymore. And so since that age, up until when I left Islam officially, I mean, it happened gradually, I don't know if there was a single day when I did all 5 prayers. It was just so difficult for me. Even when I was in the Muslim Student Association, I remember I would do them with others, and that made it a little bit easier. But you obviously don't do all 5 prayers with others, and so I was consistently missing them. And I would try, and I would try, and I just couldn't. I would always think back to that moment when I was 15 and think, I think I'm still being punished for that. I think my body's just incapable of doing it because I've done so much wrong. I don't know, but whatever. So moved out to California. I don't remember even trying to pray when I moved out there or caring. And I did end up bringing a prayer mat with me. And then I actually started dating someone there as well. And I remember talking to him about this, and I remember questioning a lot. It got to the point where I wasn't just questioning Islam, I was just questioning God's existence, period. And I just felt like there were no good arguments for God's existence. There was no good evidence for it. I mean, how arrogant of me to have thought that just because I couldn't come up with convincing evidence for God, that no one could. Though I will say, here was my logic. And like, it's not that bad, I think, even now. But it was the idea that, why did God create us? It's a difficult question to answer even now, if one has an answer at all. But why did God create us? And nothing made sense. You know, there are certain things you can think about where you can conclude that there's no answer that anyone can give you that would be convincing, and this was one of them for me. And I think that's actually a pretty strong argument still. Like, what could one say to convince you why God created you to suffer? I don't know. Nothing felt convincing when I thought of all the possibilities, from the best of the best to the worst of the worst. Like, nothing really convinced me. And then I thought about the nature of existence itself. Well, if it's eternal, meaning that either existence has always been or will always continue to be, that made no sense. And infinity is unfathomable to the human mind. But also, if God is the creator of all, then God himself is an infinity, and that was also unfathomable. So nothing really made sense. So again, I arrived at a conclusion that no answer that one could give would make sense. From this extreme to that extreme, both were kind of nonsensical. But at least I arrived at a place where I felt both are equally nonsensical, or equally valid, whether you want to be an optimist or a pessimist. And so I didn't become an anti-religious atheist, because I thought they really didn't have a better argument than the theists. So I genuinely became a true agnostic in the sense that I felt like no one could know. And so I was really frustrated, oftentimes I found, by the atheists who are so arrogant and totally misunderstood the theist position when it came to so many things. And I actually like theists so much more, and had often so much more respect for them, and liked the fruit of their belief. I liked what I was seeing, and I wanted it. I actually wanted to believe, but I just felt like I couldn't. I liked the community that came with it. I even remember considering visiting and joining a Unitarian Universalist church, because I knew that they were kind of trying to recreate the sense of community that comes with a faith tradition, but within a secular setting. But I didn't. And I think part of it was that I just felt like I didn't agree with everything there, because it was very much social justice oriented, which at the time I was okay with, but not okay with everything that comes along with that. I was working at this organization where I was defending religious freedom and having so many experiences with religious folks, and my level of respect just continued going up, but I just couldn't believe. At the same time, politically, I was becoming more and more liberal in some things, but kind of always remain conservative in some things, because having been Muslim, I was always conservative about certain social issues, but also having joined the religious freedom group, I became, I guess, what would be considered conservative now, even though traditionally, I guess, would have been liberal about certain issues like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. But yeah, I was a Bernie Sanders supporter. I could have never imagined ever supporting anyone conservative politically, because while I was okay with people who were conservative socially in many ways, and I understood why they would vote politically because of the social things that they cared about, I just felt that the bad outweighed the good with the Republicans and vice versa with the Democrats. That whole war within, my own mind of whether God exists, what is the nature of being, really tormented me for a while, but gradually I came to think of it less and less, and I just woke up one day, I don't know when, and I just was like, I'm not Muslim in any way, shape, or form, and I don't want to be. I don't really believe in it. So I became agnostic. I ended up marrying the person that I was dating in California, and that marriage did not work out. So we went our separate ways, and this is when I went to the southern part of the United States. And the dissolution of that marriage was very difficult for me. I didn't expect it to be that difficult, to be honest. It hit me a lot harder than I expected it to. So that fell apart. My relationship with my parents never really recovered. In fact, it just continued deteriorating, and that really messed with me also. So it felt like a lot of my relationships were falling apart. I kind of started to isolate myself, I think. I started to realize that there was no point to life. I think I was trying to bury that feeling with so much, with things, with people, with YouTube, and just realizing that I don't know if I even wanted kids. I don't know if I'll ever be in a position to have kids or find someone to have kids with, to be honest. And I didn't see a future, really. And I had no past, it felt like. And also just, even if I had those, what was the point of anything? What was even the point of that, right? If everything ended in meaninglessness. And what's even the point of meaning itself, right? It's just you can go down this rabbit hole of asking all these questions where nothing makes sense. It's what is what? What is language? What is, I don't know. And I remember asking a lot of people in my life, what's the point of life? Why do you care about continuing to exist, about continuing to do this? What's the point of anything? And I really didn't get a convincing answer, and the best I could get was, there is no point, you just make your own meaning. Okay, so at least we agree that there's no point, and so long as we agree that there's no point, I don't think we have to agree that you make your own meaning. That's nonsensical, right? That doesn't make any sense. And so I wanted meaning, or I wanted out. I became really depressed. I descended into nihilism. I think that's what has to happen if you're being honest with yourself. And yeah, I didn't see a way out. It got to the point where I tried medication, I tried therapy, and they're kind of helping, not helping. I'm not gonna get into that, but I somehow got into my head that I think I need to believe in God, and I think this is my last hope. And I want to do it just to help myself get better. Maybe if I can somehow force myself to believe. I really want to put in a good faith effort, and I just didn't know how to go about doing that. Eventually I started watching an interview with RFK Jr. of all people, and he was talking about his faith. I think he was being interviewed on some Christian network. I'll try to link the video if I find it. And he was saying that he sort of had a similar experience, and his stemmed from his father's assassination when he was 14 years old. He said for 14 years he was addicted to drugs and he wanted to get better. And he had a friend who did end up getting better after becoming a Moonie, heretical Christian sect, and he said he didn't want to become a Moonie, but he wanted whatever his friend had, because somehow his friend just all of a sudden was healed. And he was raised in a Catholic family, so he naturally decided to go back to the faith of his family, and he wanted to believe, but he didn't know how. And he said he found this book by Carl Jung, the psychologist, and called Synchronicity. He read it, and in it Jung tries to prove that miracles happen at a rate higher than probability would allow. But he said he couldn't. To his credit, he said he couldn't prove that, but one thing he did notice is that his patients who did believe in God had better outcomes. And RFK Jr. says that to him that was more convincing than if Jung had said that he could prove miracles did occur, because if he had said the latter, he wouldn't have believed him anyway. But he said because he'd vowed to himself that he'd do whatever to improve his condition, he wants to believe in God now. But his next obstacle was, well, if I don't believe, how do I just start believing? I mean, if I pretend to believe, that's just kind of hypocritical. It's not real faith. He says Carl Jung has a solution to this, and his solution is essentially just that, like, fake it till you make it. And so I remember hearing those words, and for whatever reason, they really hit me. And it's possible that had they come at a different time in my life, they would not have resonated with me in that way, but they did in that moment. I remember I was lying in bed, and I looked out the window, and the sun was shining, and the birds were chirping, and it just felt like almost like a movie scene. Perfectly, things just were coming together, and I felt like I had finally found a formula that I could follow to arrive at faith. And so if you live as if you believe, eventually you might actually believe. And I thought that was easy enough for me to do. I don't have to pretend that I actually do, but I'll just live as if I do and be open to it if it does happen, because I genuinely wanted to believe, you know? And so I started that journey not knowing, though, which God or which conceptualization of God, because which religion you follow determines what God looks like. And so I figured I could also turn to the faith of my family, which is Islam, and I did. And so I got a Quran and some commentaries with hadith on the Quran, and I also, around that time, went to a rally, a political rally, and at that rally I met this friend. It was amazing that this happened literally around the same time, not too long after. Now that I think about it, actually, this is kind of mind-boggling. But this friend, she's Christian. She's really interesting. She's one of those people who just, you know, kind of forces herself on you. Not in a bad way. But, you know, as an introvert, you sometimes need friends like that who will be persistent and get you out of your shell, and will take no, obviously, as an answer, but will not take it as total defeat and essentially never invite you to things again. They'll just persist. And not a sense of crying on that too. It's really interesting. Eventually, because we hung out again and we were just talking about politics, literally she did not bring up religion at all. I, on my own accord, because I was already starting this journey, I was asking her questions, and I said, you know, I'm on this religious path, a religious journey, and I kind of told her my background. That was it. I didn't ask, but then I really felt compelled to ask her. At some later point in the future, after we met up a couple of times, I texted her, and I said, hey, I have some questions that I want to ask about Christianity. Are you available sometime to talk over the phone or meet in person? And I forgot that she told me that she's a theology teacher at a school, so that was pretty convenient. What a coincidence. And she said, yeah, let's meet up and talk about this. So we met up and talked, and I asked her, one of the first questions I think I asked her was, explain the Trinity, because it was nonsensical to me. It doesn't make any sense. It's illogical, it's self-refuting, like, what do you mean? And I think she started out by explaining that it's a mystery, which immediately turned me off, because I was like, oh my gosh, of course it's a mystery. Like, but how do you accept something just based on the fact that it's a mystery? Like, that, it has to make some sense at some level. But we had conversations about so many things, and she answered them and gave me very orthodox answers, which is great, and I respected them, but I didn't feel convinced by them. And I remember she had recommended I watch Father Mike Schmitz on YouTube, which I didn't end up watching at the time. I did watch him later on, but at the time I didn't, because I was like, who's that? Why would I do that? It sounds very Catholic. I'm just so interested in, like, mere Christianity. And I told her, okay, cool. I said, yeah, I'm exploring religion. I'm interested in looking into Islam. And I was like, maybe even Christianity. And the only reason, honestly, is because I've had so many Christian friends throughout my life whom I deeply admired and respected, especially Catholics. Somehow I ended up around. I worked with a lot of Catholics at the Religious Freedom nonprofit. One of my best friends in college was Catholic, even though she was no longer Catholic. RFK Jr. was Catholic. And then this friend that I happened upon was Catholic. So just felt like, got to bring a lot of Catholics in my life. To me at the time, Catholicism was no different than any other brand of Christianity, or if it was different, it wasn't that huge. I mean, I knew about the papacy, but I didn't know enough to really care that much. But I did have an understanding of Catholicism being a little bit more demanding of you, and so I wasn't really interested at that point in that, because I just was interested in the bare bones of what made Christianity true. Of course, now I realize that's the layperson's understanding who's not Christian of Christianity looking in from the outside. Of course, now I realize that you don't necessarily have to separate those two, but I think especially with America being a primarily Protestant nation, that's the vibe that I got. So one thing she did say that was consequential was she told me, well, have you read the Bible? And I said, not really. I said, I used to have a Bible and I read certain sections of the Old Testament. She said, okay, well, how about you get a Bible? And she told me that there were differences between the Protestant and Catholic Bibles, which I had no idea. And she said, get a Bible and start with the New Testament. I said, oh, okay, cool. I might actually do that, thank you. And that did sound appealing to me, unlike watching some random Father Mike Schmitz videos. But I like the idea of reading the Bible because also in my mind, the religious text is the heart of the religion, right? And in many ways it is, but I equated it with the Quran in Christianity, not knowing at the time that the Bible in Christianity is not analogous to the Quran in Islam. Christ is to Christianity as the Quran is to Islam. But yeah, I got a Bible. I remember the first Bible that I got was a Catholic Bible, and it was the NABRE translation. So it's the New American Bible Revised Edition. It's not the greatest translation, but it's okay, because I ended up getting another Bible right after that that I liked more, which ended up being a Protestant Bible, and it was the NIV, which I love. I still love. I got a couple of them because I got a really big one that was like a study Bible, and then I found it kind of difficult to just read in bed or wherever I wanted to, because I also wanted to read it on the go. So I got a smaller one, and that became like my go-to everyday Bible. And I was hooked. So I started reading the Quran and the New Testament at the same time. And reading them both side by side was really eye-opening because of the story of Jesus Christ himself. Jesus is featured very prominently in, obviously, the New Testament, but also in the Quran. Most non-Muslims are surprised to find. And comparing the two narratives was really what kind of did it for me. And there was one specific issue that I encountered that I just could not get past. And it was essentially, in my opinion, a mistake that was a result of clear plagiarism just done poorly. And it's related to the person of Mary, mother of Jesus Christ. Muslims always say this. Mary is the only woman mentioned by name in the Quran. There's an entire chapter named after her, Maryam. And funnily enough, maybe this is the case for every Muslim girl, I don't know. As soon as I found out about that chapter in the Quran, as soon as I had read it, it became my favorite chapter in the Quran. First of all, I actually love how melodious it is and how it sounds when it's read aloud. But also I love the fact that this was after, Mary, and she was a woman, the only woman named in the Quran, and I actually love the story. Of course, it has other stories as well, all of which I loved. So it's always been my favorite chapter since I've had a favorite chapter. Her story, though, it isn't just in that one chapter, but she's mentioned in the Quran as being the sister of Aaron, which I decided to look into that in the Bible to see if that's consistent with the story in the Bible, and it wasn't, because I realized that there was another Mary-like name in the Bible, which is Miriam, and in Arabic it's Maryam, and Mary, mother of Jesus, is also Maryam in Arabic, and I think that's also true in Aramaic, so her name's actually Maryam. But I realized, oh no, the only Maryam in the Bible who has a brother named Aaron is Miriam's sister of Moses, whose brother is Aaron. And it turned out there was a hadith, and hadith is a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, where someone did call him out on this, asking him, I can't remember if it was a Jew or a Christian in Arabia who asked him about this, but someone realized that he must have plagiarized and gotten the wrong Maryam. Muhammad says, oh no, I didn't get the wrong Mary. This is just a tradition from the time where people would, I guess, honor each other by referring to one another as the sister of so-and-so just because it was like a dignified way to refer to them or something like that. It was just not completely nonsensical. And not only is it nonsensical, and it seems like an obvious case of someone trying to cover up for the plagiarism on which they were called out, but there's no evidence of that ever having been the case, as a practice. And I was really blown away by that. The other thing was, even if you could explain that away, the other problem was there's another chapter in the Quran called the House of Imran, and it's talking about Mary again, and she's referred to as the daughter of Imran, which is Arabic for Amram, and Amram in the Bible is once again the father of Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. So once again, it feels like they got the wrong women. And this one, there's nothing to explain that away. There's nothing in the hadith literature about that at all. And one, maybe you could explain away, even though I wasn't buying that. But two, that was just clear evidence that this was completely fabricated. That was it for me, to be honest. I mean, there's so many other things. Like, I was building a case still, just in case. I was building a case, and I built such a strong case. My Quran has so many tabs in it. And then the other big thing was Jesus Christ's crucifixion itself, because in Islam, the claim is that he was never crucified, that God saved him. But the Quran explicitly says that God made it seem to them as if he were crucified, but that in his place, someone else was crucified. Okay, I never questioned this as a Muslim, because it didn't matter enough to me to question this, but now reading the same story from the Christian perspective, I started asking, well, why? Why would God do that? Why would he make it seem to people as if he were crucified? Why? That resulted in the spread of the world's largest religion now, that now we're supposed to believe is a false religion because of an act of deception carried out by God himself. What does that do to the notion of a just and good God to willingly deceive people in that way? That didn't make sense. But then, even more convincing, which again really shocked me, was the historicity of the Bible and its transmission and how reliable it was. I had no idea. I mean, I believed what the average person believes who's either not Christian or anti-Christian, which is that the Bible is a translation of a million translations and can't be trusted, and there are fabrications in it, and there are inconsistencies that you can't account for historically, and that's just so far from the truth. I was shocked to discover that essentially the Bible we have today is what was, for all intents and purposes, what was written in Greek, the original Greek, of which we have thousands of manuscripts, and the fact that it's historically verifiable, that even non-Christian historians who study this believe that Jesus Christ was crucified. So now, to accept Islam, I had to reject the historically verifiable claim, and I had to accept the seemingly obvious act of plagiarism. Those two are impossible. So it's very serendipitous, providential, that it was the story of Jesus Christ himself that made the Quran obviously false. And then, I'm not even going to get into all the morally objectionable things that I learned about that I had no idea about, because they were never taught, in Muslim school that I attended as a kid, or in my liberal university where I studied this stuff. I'm not even talking about things in the hadith literature, of which, oh my gosh, there's so many. I mean, I don't know if a single person has ever read the entire corpus of hadith literature, but it's too large. And yeah, I think I'll make a video about that, just because I think the way the hadith was collected is really problematic, and it doesn't add up, the number of hadith that Bukhari, for instance, supposedly collected in the amount of time that he supposedly collected it. So anyway, but yeah, at the same time, as I was reading the story of Jesus Christ in the Gospels, I was captivated. I was blown away by so many things. First of all, this text was written 2,000 years ago, somehow felt radical compared to the Quran, which was written way later. It felt radical had it been written today, honestly. It felt timeless, and it felt as if it felt like it was speaking directly to me. And I cried as I read the Gospels so many times. I remember reading the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew, and the Beatitudes were so beautiful. But then, Jesus talking about divorce and contrasting that with the Islamic view of marriage and having 4 wives, and how women effectively had no rights, and forgiveness and praying for those who persecute you. So radical. It's insane. I couldn't understand why as I was reading, I was asking this question, what incentive would someone have to come up with this? What do they gain? Because that's often the case, right? It's like with Muhammad, I could see clear benefits that he was gaining. Oh my gosh, could I write books about the benefits that he was gaining. I couldn't see that with Jesus. I couldn't see that with his apostles. I couldn't understand how people could come up with such a beautiful text it felt divine in many ways, and I was absolutely in love with the person of Jesus Christ. I mean, him talking about forgiveness, I felt like I had so much hatred and anger in my own heart towards certain people, certain family members even, and it was really, I could have never forgiven anyone. I would have gone my entire life never forgiven anybody. And I would have felt okay with not forgiving them, even though the lack of forgiveness was probably corrupting me. But feeling forgiven, it felt so much easier to forgive. And I didn't even realize that was a thing. It felt stupid. I remember thinking like, oh, you're so stupid. What are you doing? Why are you believing this? Why do you like this idea of feeling forgiven? Forgiven for what? I mean, of course, I know I'd done so many things that I probably needed to be forgiven for. I'd hurt so many people. I'm pretty sure whether I knew it or not. In some ways, I definitely knew it. Feeling forgiven somehow, even when I felt like, who even has the authority to forgive me? I felt forgiven, and